The contemporary left in the West, especially in America, is critiqued to no end. But very few critiques actually address perhaps what I think is one of the most devastating and most important criticisms of leftism in both a moral sense, a societal sense, and also a political sense, is its inability to understand the true nature of human evil and to address that in its political ideology on a political level and a social level. Indeed, I argue that because of the principles and the philosophies that animate both original and modern day leftism in America, these ideas disable their moral sense rather, and disable their ability to truly grasp the topic of evil and deal with it to the fullest extent that it must. Now, this should not be construed to say that conservatives perfectly understand evil. Although I think, generally, conservative political philosophy has a much better sense of the flaws of human nature because it actually admits facts about human nature that are indispensable in any assessment of it, whereas leftism, as I will explain, does the exact opposite and paints a very false picture of human nature, of the human being, and how he relates to society and the world around him. But before I get to this, I should probably illustrate to you some examples of the general topic before I actually explain why I believe leftism does not quite understand evil. There was recently a case out of New York where a migrant was accused of beating a 1-year-old child out of Rhode Island, beating a 1-year-old child to death. In 2014, as this tweet says, a Democrat governor made Rhode Island a sanctuary state. And so this individual illegally entered the country. He was not a migrant. He was an illegal who entered the country, beat this child to death, and of course, just caused a lot of pain. There's been other instances of this kind of happening as well, whether it be in San Francisco, which was the basis for Kate's Law, where an illegal who had been deported several times beat a woman called Kate to death, so on and so forth. And this is not to demonize people that come here as migrants or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. Any of you that think that are wrong in your conception. But this is to say that oftentimes the basis for letting people who come into America illegally come into America that way is that it's an act of compassion. It's a reflection of the bleeding heart philosophy that underlies a lot of leftist political theory and action, the idea that a compassionate society will not just be compassionate in the basic sense in terms of individuals giving of themselves to help others selflessly, but they will be compassionate in the sense of instituting policies on an institutional level to ensure that selflessness is not simply the lot of individuals in society, but reflects the will of the whole society via politics. Now, Peter Singer, who is also a left-wing philosopher, basically has this idea called effective altruism. And in this idea, it goes this: if you have the means to do so, no matter if you know someone or have a connection with that particular person, you have the duty to help others you do not know. Even if you don't know them, even if you've never met them, if you simply have the means to do something, you have the duty to do it. Now, this makes no sense because I can only really undertake a moral duty if I have a connection to the person who I am obligated to. What's an obligation without a connection? But under leftism, this is not only an assumption that is made time and time again, this is the basis of their egalitarian moral philosophy. Now, going into this, we should understand this is not just about immigration. When it comes to rioting, what do you oftentimes notice coming from left-wing minds? When people, for example, during the George Floyd protest, burnt down buildings, destroyed their own communities, even killed people, even did all kind of things, destroyed all kind of private property. What was the number one line of apologia from the left? Rioting is the voice of the oppressed. In fact, there were entire op-eds written in places like The Nation and others that literally said, yes, rioting is good because those who are marginalized in society can't get their voices out in other ways. Not only does this imply a sentiment about human nature and the ability of the human being to achieve greatness despite limitations, assuming those limitations are even correct in this sense, I'm being charitable, But this also demonstrates something about how leftists view man's relationship with society and its institutions. Let me give you another example before I break all of this down for you guys. Another example, very simply, is in how leftists deal with the issue of wealth and property. Oftentimes, you will hear leftists say that private property should not be the focus of efforts. Instead, eliminating poverty should be, and that private property can sometimes lead to selfishness. Again, how can I appreciate something without a connection to it? Private property is quite literally the basis, not only of society, but the basis of my ability to act in society in a manner that is both beneficial for myself, my family, and everyone else. If no one owned anything, or what I owned was controlled by others through some means, whether it's taxation or whatever, then I'm not going to be able to be the most fully active moral agent, the most fully active contributor to society that I can be, because my connection to the society has been diminished. Once I'm connected, then I can act in ways that may go beyond myself. But if not connected, I can only act by force as a serf, not an individual in society who can contribute with it under his own will. Think about how leftists have treated the issue of the police. The defund the police movement explicitly calls for replacing police with social services. Social services that would have to deal with people that are mentally insane and oftentimes have weapons, domestic violence, all kinds of situations that a counselor is not equipped to deal with. Is this simply idealism that has gone too far? No. It demonstrates all of these things, the illegals, the social services in place of police to handle violent issues, the antipathy towards private property. All of this reflects a genuine misunderstanding and an ability to understand the problem of evil. The truth is, my friends, leftists view the world generally through two prisms, and both of these prisms are indicative of two very different periods of history in the Western left. One of these prisms is materialism. This is the old left that basically reduced all the problems in society to class status and then tried to use the government as a tool to rectify the supposed problems between the classes to ensure wealth equality, to eliminate poverty, to beat back the proletariat. This was the entire calling card of the progressive era in America, where wealth inequality and supposed injustices that went against their social sense of justice were the culprits and the victims of the innocent at the time. And so it was then the idea of the government to go in and correct these things. For example, the idea of child labor, right? Throughout history, children have worked in voluntary capacities on their family farm or elsewhere, and that has built character. But during the progressive era, that idea was so demonized because they took a few stray instances of abuse and then made those instances of abuse appear as if that's the whole of the entire thing. It was a conflation. It was a proximity ethics type conflation to damn the good parts of a concept by only looking at the bad parts of a concept, and it actually worked because child labor to this day is still associated with sweatshops and forced labor and bad things. But in all reality, it wasn't entirely that way throughout history. I can give you more examples. Child welfare, for example. Child welfare. So the idea was, during the progressive era, that children and women were disadvantaged in society, and therefore we need to create an entire political system to help them. What this ended up doing was empowering an organization that is now called CPS to begin making political assessments of parenthood, undermining the family, and taking kids away from their parents if their parents do something like, for example, in the modern day, not agree to go along with their child's supposed gender identity, and that has resulted in kids being taken away from their parents. Every single solution that the old left had to these problems was based on a sense of materialism, on class status. If you were a woman, if you were a child, if you were a worker, if you were impoverished, you were the one who needed to have the help. Whereas the enemy groups, the rich, the industrial capitalists, the owner of the businesses, they were the ones who needed to be fought against. And so leftism had this class-based view for the first half of the 20th century. But then the new left comes along in the 1960s with Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and these people that concocted a new political system of values that was based entirely on identity, on your sex, on your gender, on your sexuality, on your disability status, and all these other things that were fitted into this one metric and then used to view the entire world. And then you get these philosophies that come from this thing. And so leftism and seeing the world as a mixture of materialism and a mixture of identity has blinded itself from being able to understand the world for what it truly is beyond that narrow binary way of thinking, and consequently being able to understand evil. If you excuse the destruction of private property and the endangering of someone's livelihood because they are somehow fighting oppression, you are using the metric of either identity or materialism to justify evil. If you excuse someone's willful disregard for the laws and norms of a country, and in doing that, refuse to fully acknowledge the range of consequences that could come from allowing people to willfully disregard the laws and norms of our country in the name of those norms and laws being oppressive or patriarchal or systemically racist or whatever, you are someone who is not quite capable of understanding and fully appreciating evil. If you excuse bad behavior and poor performance in the name of equity, in the name of accepting those things as a result of some kind of system that has held people down, and you believe that the human spirit is so weak and so crushed by a system that it cannot rise up and actually try to achieve anything that approaches excellence, you are someone who cannot quite recognize or acknowledge evil. If you excuse looting and burning and stealing to fight oppression, you can't acknowledge evil because your paradigm quite literally enables bad behavior for political change, meaning you are kind of an accomplice to evil. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say the values that many leftists tend to have are lesser values that cannot quite comprehend the full range of what must be comprehended for society to function well and for our political order to also function well. Evil, my friends, is a value judgment. When I say something is evil, I am assigning a value to something. But for leftists, diversity is also a value judgment. So you have two competing value judgment. One, which is evil, which has been acknowledged and understood throughout history in different form by different people, but it exists in this concrete. And diversity, which is an aesthetic fact, a fact of the senses and the looks, that has been transformed into a value judgment in society and in politics. The leftist value of diversity has conflated aesthetics, how something looks, with morality, and in doing so has confused entire generations of left-wing thinkers about what morality and what good ethics actually are. That's the truth. Because if evil is a value judgment, and diversity is also a value judgment, and you give more credence to diversity over the issue of evil, you're not going to focus very much on the issue of evil, even if you claim to want to fight it. Just by necessity of limitations, you won't have the ability to do so. So instead of your moral thinking being dominated by these true concerns, they are dominated by the lesser values that you have decided to adopt instead of the true ones you should have been focused on anyhow. I'm not saying that leftists are evil. I don't believe that. In fact, I don't attack the person. What I am saying is that if you subscribe to the philosophy of materialism, which is dominant on the left, on the old left part, that advances the idea of class status as being the metric of value for political and social action, and if you also endorse the idea of diversity, which is very, very prominent on the modern new left, which puts an emphasis on minorities and people of color and homosexuality, gays and women and all this kind of stuff, and uses that as a metric for political value and political action and social philosophy, then you have been made ignorant to true evil that falls outside of those two systems of lesser values, because those two systems, being valued judgments, confuses your ability to understand what is right and wrong, and confuses your ability to analyze social situations through a sound lens. You can't understand human nature by looking at someone's material possessions. Material possessions are simply one facet of one aspect of the ability of the human being to do something and the product thereof. You can't understand what is right or what is wrong or what is politically sound by looking at how many women are in a particular position, or how many gays are in a particular position, or how many POCs or blacks are in a particular position, because aesthetics says nothing about substance. If you have people of different aesthetics that all hold the same value, you will ultimately get the same exact result. And yet these two things are dominant on the left. And they leave them leftists blind to the moral atrocities sometimes undertaken by people in those groups. Think of the submarine incident that happened, the Titanic submarine incident, a submersible. This wasn't everybody, but a lot of people on the left were celebrating the deaths of people in that submersible on the basis of them being capitalists. That's the identity and the materialistic paradigms coming together to justify what should be a tragedy. When your views and your values capture your mind so much so that you cannot see the world beyond them, or rather see them in the context of the world, you can't possibly understand evil, because to understand evil, you must see the world with clear eyes, and you must see events that happen in the context of the world. We get our morality from understanding the relationship between the principles of a reality that we can gain through reason and the behavior of people in accordance with those principles. We can understand what is just and what is correct also by that relationship. But unfortunately, leftist political philosophy has so degraded that relationship that it is now almost forgotten in political thinking for many people, even folks on the right, because the norm is not to consider those things. The norm, rather, is to consider one's personal lesser values as the dominant values and as the standard. We have to aspire to a higher standard, rather, to be repetitive, than that. Evil, my friends, is what happens when someone, in rejection of their internal moral sense, their conscience, in rejection of the principle of justice, which is the foundation of society, in rejection of goodwill, which is simply charitability towards your fellow man when it is deserved, acts in a way that betrays all of those things, and also by doing that betrays the common humanity. When someone kills a 1-year-old girl, I don't care if they're an immigrant, I don't care if they're a POC, they betrayed their common humanity, they betrayed their conscience, they have betrayed justice. By that definition, they are evil. But if you're more worried about them being an undocumented immigrant or a POC or a trans person, if you're more worried about Aubrey Hale and Nashville, who shot up a bunch of innocent Christian kids, being a depressed trans person, as was said by many people, as opposed to being someone who rejected their common humanity and undertook a vile act, then unfortunately, your thinking has been disturbed, blunted, and degraded by your system of lesser values. Evil is evil no matter who commits it, and evil must be called out from all sides. Not only that, but evil must be acknowledged by anyone of any ideology to be the chief opponent of a good society, to be the fundamental aim of preventing for a political order, and also to be a good moral instructor on what to avoid. If we taught more kids, more people in school about evil, perhaps society would look different. But unfortunately, evil is not taught today in schools. Sexual education is taught in schools, which really should be taught only by the parents, not by the teachers. Victimology, victimhood, 1619 Project, that's taught in schools. Genderqueer and all these books that try to ingrain social ideas into the minds of kids. That's snuck into schools in an indirect way, and in some cases, it's pushed on to students unofficially by their teachers. It goes on and on and on and on. Everyone of all ideologies must recognize the importance of fighting evil, of acknowledging evil, and fighting evil. But leftism, due to its internal structure, can do none of those things because evil has taken advantage and will continue to take advantage of the ideological blind spots that so many people on the left tend to have. One last thing. Leftists tend to view human nature in terms of institutions. They tend to view people as groups that don't have access or that have access versus as individuals. And I will just say this. When you remove the individual from the social context, you have no basis for morality. I can't be just or unjust towards a group because a group is an abstraction that I can't touch, I can't hold. It is a thought form created by some intellectual somewhere that is only good as a heuristic to understand basic things. But when it actually comes down to morality and moral behavior and thoughts and conscience, I can only weigh those on the individual level in any meaningful sense. But when you say that man is created by institutions, or rather, his entire nature is shaped by institutions. This was the Rousseauian idea that man is born free, but is everywhere in chains. It's that man by his nature is inherently good, but society messes him up, which is why the idea of positive rights says people need permissions from the government and from society in order to be good, because otherwise society messes you up. When you begin to think that way, you have removed the individual from the moral context, you have distorted the nature of human nature, which is really a rather objectively set, unchanging set of principles and behaviors informed by the internal processes of the body and refined through man's ability to reason. You've ignored all of that, and you've instead cemented your social agenda as being necessarily necessitated by the need to better and perfect man. This is the egregious error of leftist thinking. The idea that you can perfect man or make man better simply by fulfilling his material needs without ever looking at the things that are rooted deeply in the heart and the soul, that go beyond society, that go beyond the government, that go beyond his material means and strike to the core of what he means to be human. But so long as institutions and systems of oppression matter more than the actual human experience that we're all having, then the longer these more important issues will be rejected and the institutional view of man will prevail. Where the institutional view of man prevails, evil cannot truly be addressed because it will always simply be seen as rather a result of institutions as opposed to as a result of an individual rejecting his common humanity. But where an individualistic view of man prevails, not only can evil be confronted, it can be faced, it can be held accountable, and it can be assessed correctly. Because ultimately, all of us are in charge of and responsible for our actions. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you like me and you like to hear about philosophy and all that kind of stuff and the social and political context, be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe this video, donate to me as you will, PayPal, Patreon, all that kind of stuff as well. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. My friends, I love you guys so much. Study history, study philosophy, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.